Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second episode of Prepared, Aware, and Ready to Buy, aka Prepared and Ready. You're here with your co-host, James Murphy from Advisor Mortgage Group, along with the amazing Laurie Savino.
Hey James, good morning. Hi guys, my name is Laurie Savino. I'm a real estate agent in both New York and New Jersey. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you, Laurie. How you doing today, Laurie? How's
Mm,
your day going? This beautiful
yes,
afternoon.
beautiful September day today. So everything is really good. Busy, glad to be here. And I know everyone's really excited because, the Feds dropped the interest rates a bit. So we have a lot to talk about today.
They sure did, and everybody's been talking about it. Yesterday was so crazy. I actually almost forgot what day it was today. Uh, Thank you. It is September, and I appreciate the reminder of the month even.
I know. But beautiful weather, beautiful September.
Yeah. Today, our show is titled "Homeownership: All That and a Bag of Chips." Lori, we're gonna break down chips. Chips is an acronym, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a sucker for an acronym. How about you?
Yeah, I know you love it. And it makes it really fun to remember. So this one's a good one. Bag of
It
chips.
is. I feel like you can break almost anything down. But today, CHIP stands for choices, hardships, interest, profits, and savings.
Mhm.
So I'm going to touch a little bit on, I'm going to break down each one of these letters into three different points, just some talking points. And Laura, you'll do the same, I assume, correct? Of
Yes, absolutely.
course. I'll start off and let's start with choices. Why don't we do a back and forth? We'll each cover each letter. How about that before we move
Yeah,
on to
sounds great.
fantastic? So choices, Lori. Today, I don't know about you, but when I hear about choices in this real estate transaction, I'm always thinking about first thing I'm thinking about is a team, right?
Mhm.
I think it's so important that as a buyer, that the buyer looks at who they're using for their services, all
Right.
right? What team they're putting together, that being the real estate professional, the mortgage professional, the attorney, the home inspection, you name it, the homeowner's insurance agent, everybody involved in the transaction. What are your thoughts on how important a team is, Lori?
Well, especially right now with the decoupling of commission, it's really important that you interview everyone, your mortgage broker, your real estate advisor. And that's why I like to call myself as more of an advisor because when you're coming to me, everyone has different needs in real estate. So we will be able to break that down and figure out what's the best for you. And then also we work with the best vendors. Like for instance, I work with James. I know how he works. I know that my clients are going to be protected. They're going to be taken care of really well, right? So when you hire the right real estate agent, then you get all those vendors around surrounding that agent. That's really important. So my team is so important on who I align myself with. And then I also have something called the home buying experience. So if you get to work with me, you get to kind of go through that and really see what it's like to work with a professional real estate agent.
Absolutely. And professional you are. There's no question about that. You had mentioned something about decoupling of the commission. Just for some of the viewers out there that don't know what that means, that's dealing with some recent changes in our industry, right?
Yes, it's for the NAR lawsuit. So traditionally, the seller would pay both the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. And now you may, as a buyer, have to pay your buyer's agent. So that's why it's really important that you get someone who is like I'm a certified negotiator, right? So it's really going to be there for you for the long haul and really have the best interest at hand. So some of the sellers are still paying commission, which is good, but not every property. So you have to discuss that with your real estate agent and find out if you want to see properties that are just paying your buyer's agent or you want to see all properties.
Yes. That was great. And I think that's such an important topic because that's new and there's still some buyers out there that are unaware. So thank you
Yes.
for breaking that down. As far as a team goes, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's so important that you have the people that you can trust, that you can count on, that you know are going to get you to the finish line.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, as a buyer, you might be concerned about one factor over another more so than the other, like, the money, the interest rate, the commissions, those kind of things. In reality, it's getting to that finish line that's the most important. So you want to make sure you're working with someone that you can trust that's going to get you there.
Absolutely.
Uh, when I think of choices, the next one I'm thinking about is location, right? As a buyer, you're choosing where you're going to spend however many more years of your life, not to mention where you're going to build your wealth through that appreciation of the home. So let's talk about how important location is to a home buyer.
So location is really important. And what I tell my buyers is to drive by the neighborhood, right, in the morning, in the afternoon, at night, really get a sense of what the community is like. Maybe something is with a commute as well, right? Like, so how long does it take you to get to work every day. If you go in 5 days, if you're not, and you get to be that hybrid now, it's kind of good, but you want to know those kind of things. So location is really important and depending on, what you want to look at on the community. And, school systems, you want to look at everything. And I have some great websites for all my buyers to be able to kind of go to. One of them is called Niche. So you can do something like Niche Bay Ridge, Niche Atlantic Highlands, and it will give you a rundown of what the community is like. So it's really, really important. Location is very important.
That's fantastic. And you use those websites yourself, or do you share them in that package that you mentioned?
Yes,
To your
absolutely. So anytime we are going to talk about a community, I will send them to that website and it's where they can look up and it's a wealth of information. It's one of my best sites that I love. It's
It's
called
fantastic.
Mhm.
Lori, I think you're a wealth of information. Let's talk about the budget, right? I mean, we're talking choices here. We have to determine, one of the biggest choices we make in life is how much we take on in debt versus
Right.
how much income we're bringing in, right? We never want to overextend ourselves. We never want to overburden ourselves. And I feel like, when buyers do that, they become what's called house poor, right? Where every single dollar you're making is going towards that mortgage payment or the utilities or the whatever have you, taxes, insurance. There's so many costs involved. So I know personally when I have a conversation with the first time home buyer, one of the things that we're exploring is what is their comfort level as well as their qualifying factor.
Right.
Most buyers, or I should say many buyers, will qualify for more than they're comfortable with, right?
Right.
So, as far as monthly payments, we look at that. We
Mhm.
determine how much they have in saving to put down as a down payment, and whether or not it might make sense to take a little less of a down payment to put down and maybe pay off some additional debt, some other debt that has high monthly payments, that might become troublesome later on down the road. They're fine now, but once you
Right.
put a few $1,000 mortgage payment on that budget, the that line item becomes a much bigger item.
Yeah.
So what do you think about budget? How do you ever have a conversation? I know it's primarily my focus as the lender, but do you ever get into that conversation with your buyers?
Yeah, in fact, I'm working with a buyer right now who actually won't speak to you because he wants to look at things. And I've said to him, you really need to know your payments. I know it. I can figure that out. And I'm like, well, you really can't. As well as, yes, you can use a mortgage calculator, but he's also maybe wanting to be an investor. So then we were talking about cap rate, right? And that's the percentage of that you get back in terms of after your operating expenses. Most investors want about 6%. So he had no idea what we're talking about in terms of that. And I said, we want to look at the numbers, all the numbers. So it's right. So what you tell me, right? What is a mortgage payment? It's the mortgage, it's the taxes and the insurance, right? So
Right.
it's a big number, and he doesn't want to look at that yet. And so we're still having conversations, but it's so important to talk about your budget and what that monthly number is going to be, especially if you're going to be an investor or possibly be an investor, or you want to make sure that you make your bills every month, right? It's so important when we talk about budget because you can be approved. And he said, I could probably get approved for 800,000, but that's not what his main focus is because he may want to be an investor, right? So he's not going to use all that money up. So
Right.
it's really important.
Yeah, I mean, and not the unknown. I think it's the unknown that creates turmoil or stress or frustrations within this process, right? And not knowing
Mm.
what your monthly payment's going to be, not knowing where you're going to qualify, not knowing any of the parts that are part of this big puzzle can create some significant hardships. And
Right.
hardships is going to be the next letter that we go through on this bag of chips. And, when we talk about hardships, there's all kinds of different effects or different things that can happen throughout the transaction. One thing I focus on are, the credit, right? Right up front, we talk about credit because credit can create some major hardships in life, right? It can limit our access to money. It can increase our costs of money. Credit can control a lot. So, in my conversations, what we're doing is we're talking about where you're at right now, and we don't just look at credit as a credit score. We're looking at credit through a credit profile. So that's how many trade lines you have, how old are those trade lines, how are you managing your money, right? Are there any judgments? Are there any big derogatory accounts? All that is taken into play when we consider the qualifications of a buyer.
Yeah.
So credit, I mean, how many credit stories have you heard where a buyer is telling you, oh, I was this, I had that, but this happened. There's a lot that can happen in life that's going to change the credit scores. What
Yeah.
kind of good, do you have any good stories for us, Lori?
Oh my goodness. I always tell every single buyer when we're looking at houses, and I kind of say, talk to your mortgage broker, but I already know a little bit about it. And I'm like, don't buy anything new, right? So don't go buy a car. Don't close your credit cards. A lot of people
Oh,
don't
yes.
realize, right? The length
No.
of a credit card that you have in that history helps your credit score. So let's say you decide to close a card that you've had for 15 years, right? So James, well, how many points would that affect? If
Well, the point,
or do you
it,
think you do, might be able to do
yeah,
that?
well, the points, it's a, it's a great question with the points because that's what the focus is on. But the points vary, right? So it's hard to gauge. Credit's tricky, I'll tell you. Sometimes you think this is going to work out when you do X, and then next thing Y comes and it's completely unexpected. So I always say credit's a balancing act, right? So you can have derogatory accounts as long as you have those positive accounts to
Right,
offset, right? So to your point about that old trade line, that's a fantastic trade line. That thing is worth a lot of points. It's worth a lot of value in your credit score because it shows a consistency.
right,
It shows an accountability, a dependency, a factor that you know how to manage your credit, right? Because you've had a long period of time without any lates or anything like that. So those old trade lines are super, super important.
yeah,
And then
very
when you do close out them, you offset that balance, right?
right, exactly. And a lot of people want to buy furniture, right? Because they're getting close
Mhm.
to
Oh
closing.
yeah,
And I'm like, after closing, do not buy anything.
absolutely.
Don't touch your credit cards. Don't do this. If you want to pay down, yes, great. Just pay
Yeah.
down your cards. But talk to your mortgage broker. I tell it all the time, and they don't think it matters, and it matters. Like because all of a sudden you're buying $10,000 or $15,000, worth of furniture, or you're getting a new kitchen done, and you're giving a huge down payment, and it's not cash. You know, that's a really big thing. Yep.
I'll tell you, I love the surprise renewal of the lease, or the new car, or the 10% off at Old Navy. So they got a new store credit card. You just shake your head and you wonder why. We've talked
Right,
about this
right. And
multiple
right.
times.
We just ruined your whole file. And it
I
happens
think it's
a lot.
I think it comes down to you don't know what you don't know often, right?
Right. I love that saying. Yep.
Which I love it, which is why I think this show is going to be so important and why it's so valuable to our buyers because there's plenty of stuff we're going to talk about over the next few episodes that are going to really enlighten these buyers and make them aware of what they need to be aware of and have them ready and prepared to buy or sell.
Right.
So with those hardships, cash is another one. I find cash to be funny. They think cash is king unless you're getting a mortgage, right? If you're buying real estate in cash, I'm sure you can attest to that. That's fantastic, but not everybody has liquid funds like that or access. So
No.
cash is important to understand from a lender's perspective and from the loan process. Cash is bad, right? Because you have to always season that money. That money always needs to be in a bank or in some financial institution for 60 days or more. And if that cash is noticed as far as a large deposit, it's always going to get questions. So
Right.
I always tell my buyers, take the cash out from the mattress, get it out of the
Right.
box,
Exactly.
throw it in the bank before you start looking because it needs to season. It's like a piece of meat or a fine wine. The longer it's in there, the better.
Right.
Well, maybe not the meat part, not so much meat, but
I don't
good
understand
seasoning.
that either, right? Like, oh, I have this cash, like, no, you need to put it in the bank and exactly, it needs to be seasoned, it needs to be there for a while. And you need the paper trail, right? Where did that
Yeah.
cash come? It's not like you can take that box from under the mattress, right? And hand it in, well, right? You're gonna ask them questions where did this $50,000 come from, right? And there's always things that people don't realize. You can get gifts, right? You can get gifts from your parents. It just, again, has to be a paper trail.
Yes,
Mhm.
exactly. So cash is king if you have it. If you need it, make sure you're careful with the cash that you do have.
And
Um,
or even now in terms of deals, um, a really good seasoned agent will be able to look at every single offer and discuss that with their seller because your highest offer isn't always your best offer, right?
Great
What
point.
people don't realize. And there may be some terms that might be better in an offer with a mortgage than a cash offer. So you really have to look at every single offer. You have to see all the terms of the offer and be able to negotiate properly. And that's something that's really that agents are, well, here's a cash offer. We're not taking mortgages. And that's not a
Right.
good option.
No, absolutely not. And I think from a listings agent standpoint, you got to do what's best for your agent, or your seller rather, your client. So you need to entertain all those offers. So that's a great point.
Yeah.
Um, one of the terms of getting a mortgage is qualifying, right? Which also could be a hardship.
right,
So that'll be the third point of our hardships. And when I talk about the qualifying part, there's always a I like to have a say. I have a say that I like to say, and it's, sometimes qualifying for a mortgage can be similar to walking through a minefield, right?
right,
Any bad step can blow up the entire transaction.
right,
But if you've got a great team behind you and you're holding the hand of someone who's walked through those minefields for many, many years, 2 decades in my case, and I'm sure much longer, even if not the same with you, we know where the mines are, right?
yep,
We know what to avoid and where to step. So having that team is so important. Qualifying these days, you've got to get over three main hurdles that I always refer to. Those are going to be your FICO hurdle, your loan to value hurdle, and your DTI hurdle. There's
right,
many other factors, but those are the main three ones, right? So your credit score, as I mentioned earlier, your credit score is looked at with your credit profile. Loan to
right,
value is just based on what percentage of the purchase price you're going to borrow and what percentage you're going to put down as a down
right,
payment. So 20% down payment gives you an 80% loan to value, 5% down payment, 95 LTV, and
right.
so on. Your DTI is the big one, right? And the DTI is where some people get tied up because they're
Right,
over.
try to explain what DTI is for everyone.
Absolutely. A DTI is your debt to income ratio. Your debt to income ratio is really what determines that buying power. I'm sure you've heard, people talk about what's my buying power in this market or whatever have you. It's
Right,
based on a debt to income ratio. You're allowed to go up to, somewhere, it depends on the loan product, but anywhere between mid 40s to low 50s percentage of your gross income is permitted for the loan.
right,
So you look at that, we'll gauge based on what they're carrying in debt, versus what they want to take on. And that's how we'll determine their buying power. So qualifying is not as always easy as you think it is.
oh,
I used to work with a loan officer and with a couple other people, and we joke about this one loan officer, and her mindset was, well, if they're a doctor, then they've got to qualify.
hmm,
And she would even take the time sometimes to look at the full tax returns, right? And I don't know about you, but any self-employed borrower, doctor, mechanic, whoever have you, if they've got a good accountant, you better look at those tax returns because
yes,
they may not show as much money as they're living or making. So
right.
qualifying, it's always a big factor. What is it that you look at outside of the pre-approval letter? What do you look out for qualifying a buyer or a seller for that matter?
Yeah. So, well, we work well together. So we're talking about you as being a mortgage broker, and I'm always giving you information. But here in Brooklyn, so I primarily sell in Brooklyn and in New York City, and we have a lot of co-ops. So just because you
Oh
get
yeah.
approved does not mean that you can get approved for a co-op. There's a big difference. So with a co-op, you own shares, right, of the building, and if it's a condo, you own it like a house. But so if you're owning, so if you want to put an offer in on something on a co-op, your DTI the ratio is really, really important. It usually has to be below like 30%. And you also have to have a significant amount of money in the bank also, because they want to make sure that you're going to not default on your loan. So they look at things like between the mortgage payment and your HOA, something could be a year to almost 3 years in the bank for them to approve you. And then you have to go through an interviewing process. It's very long. If you're looking for a co-op, kind of call me and I will explain it in more in detail. But that's the kind of thing that really matters. So when I talk to a mortgage broker, let's say I'm the listing agent and I have an offer, I speak to the mortgage broker and I say to him, like, this is what I need to know in order to move forward, right? With this person, like, what have you looked at? Have you looked at their tax returns? How much money do they have back? What's their DTI? And then coming back to realize that they cannot afford
Mm.
a co-op. I had someone who the mortgage broker I was working with at the time said they were approved. They were not approved. And right. So it happens quite often. So and I get that really I question everything. So it's easier for me to really call that mortgage broker and get on the phone, ask them some questions, and I save people a lot of time, and a lot of agents won't do that. So you really have to be careful when it comes to co-ops. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah,
DTI.
co-ops co-ops are a different animal. I mean, because you could be completely approved, as you said,
Right.
the DPI works, I've got the automated approval, everything looks great, and then the co-ops board says, no
Yeah.
dice.
No.
No, we want a lower DTI than that one.
Yeah.
Um, One of the big talks today, like especially with what happened yesterday with the Fed, are interest rates, right?
Right.
So interest rates are a prime focus. So sometimes people ask me, "What's the interest rate today?" When I say sometimes, I mean almost all the time. Uh, Interest rates vary. Interest rates are fluid, and there's never a set number. It's also based on the loan profile of the borrower and as well as the property.
Right.
So interest rates, we were talking earlier, we were joking a little bit, and I always said I like to quote ranges, right? Because the market moves. So,
Mhm.
unless we're locking in a rate right away, we're going to talk about a range, and that's going to be your best case versus your worst case. That way, we're prepared for the worst. We're hoping for the best, but we've been prepared for the worst. So one of the things that I'll do with my buyers is
Mhm.
we'll work on in the very beginning how to improve the credit profile if needed. If the credit profile is strong, I will mention and explain why it
Right.
appears to be so strong, and we'll highlight some of the great things that they're doing to manage that credit profile. And then if not, we'll give you some steps, some tips we'll talk about
Right.
maintaining those lower balances, and maintaining the utilization to a low number, a low percentage is what I mean. And then also not opening new accounts, as we said. But as far as the qualifying, we try to make sure that their credit is as great as it can be so that they can qualify for the lowest interest rate possible. Interest rates, have you ever heard of an LLPA, Lori?
No, what is that?
A LLPA is a loan level price adjuster. Now, a
Okay.
loan level price adjuster is what Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or what is added on to that interest rate. So the market will set an interest rate. They'll say the interest rate is this today. And then based on your credit profile, as I keep saying, you'll have different add-ons, if not deductions. If you have a really strong profile, you might have zero, if not a little extra credit in the pricing on that loan. And that's going to give you the best interest rate. So, if you're a first-time home buyer, and you're within a modest amount of income. I believe in most counties in New Jersey, I believe if you're under 144,000, you actually qualify for a lower interest rate because they removed those LLPAs.
Oh,
So what we'll do is we'll analyze the file, we'll go
right.
do a whole scrub, and one of the things we're looking for is how can I maximize this buyer's credit profile so they qualify for the lowest possible score.
Right.
So interest rate can be just a matter of timing, right? It can be a matter, when you ask why does so and so have a better interest rate than I do, it's because they locked in at a better time.
Right.
The rates are going up and down. We want to catch it on the dip,
Yes.
never on
Yes.
the.
And the credit
So
score, like you said, matters so much on file, and people don't realize that, like, like the industry and the feds are saying it's a certain like percentage, but it depends on the credit score.
right, absolutely. And how often do you hear about interest when and you do recommend me often, and I do appreciate that. But how often do they come back to you and ask about my interest rate?
Oh, all the time. Like something like
I
it's
know.
they always right, and especially a lot of sellers now are talking about well I have a maybe they bought during the pandemic or they refinanced and they have a really low percentage, but they don't realize
Great
working
point.
numbers. There could be not that much difference. It depends on what they're buying, what they're putting down. So you really need to look at the whole picture, not just say, well, I have an interest rate that's under 3%, so I cannot move. That's not always
Right.
necessarily true.
Right.
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 Have to
And
work
that's
the numbers. We have to work the numbers.
have to. And what a great point you make. We call those low interest rates the golden handcuffs, right? Someone with a 2% interest rate is holding on to that thing for dear life and is
Right.
locked in as if the handcuffs are on. They want a bigger house, they want to move on, and they just can't lose sight of that number, right?
Right.
Interest is important. Obviously, it's a cost, but it's a number. And when you look at the whole big picture, as you mentioned, that was a great point, Lori, because sometimes you can reduce your other debt. You're going to sell your house for so much more money than you thought you would sell it
Right.
for, and then take some of that income or some of that profit and pay off some of your other debt,
Right.
right?
Like your
And
new
then
loan
you can,
might not be as high as the loan you have now because you've sold your house, right? And you've sold it for so much
right,
more than you realized, right? So that
right,
really matters. So you have to look at the whole picture. You have to get it analyzed. You have to talk to someone like, like you and a mortgage broker. Like I know, a little bit about it, right? Of course, because doing the deals and speaking to you, but you're the expert, right? That's what you
right,
want. That's why you want to hire me as your real estate expert, and then you want to hire you as the mortgage broker to be able to really work through all the numbers because how many times, especially, right, like the taxes don't vary as much in New York as it does in New Jersey, right? So we
oh
can,
yeah,
right? So one town can be this percentage, or even a few blocks can change, right? Because it's on a dividing line. So when we look at a house, we always go back to James and say, okay, run the numbers on this particular house because it could be so much more different. Because maybe that one house had $9,000, another one has $15,000 in taxes. Your payment is going to be much different. So when we look at that, it's in New Jersey, especially, you want to look at everything you can look at. Here, I'm a pre-approved for this amount, but with taxes in this range, and then that you're comfortable with on that payment. So there's a lot that has to go in to do with it. So when we sit down, when we talk about what you're looking for, I have a huge questionnaire that I go through with questions with my buyers. The next thing I'm gonna say is, we need to get you pre-approved, and this is why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that focus on profits is one of the things that makes us a great team because that is one of our focuses. As we're speaking with our buyers and our sellers for that matter, the profits are important because that's the purpose of the transaction, right?
Mhm.
You're going to make money on that. And profits is going to be our next segue. This will be a segue into our next letter, rather. That will be profits.
Right.
So profits, I'm going to ask you more or less before I get into my spiel. When you're working with a seller, what is the number one what are some of your focuses to increase or maximize their profits on the
Uh,
sale?
Well, we always do a walkthrough of the house, which is really important because I can look at things that maybe you have not looked at. Things like
Mhm.
coat of paint can go, I know it's expensive sometimes to paint a house, but you can literally get 10, $15,000 more because your house is freshly painted. So I look at things like, let's say that there's a stain in the ceiling from an old leak, from five
Right.
years ago. A buyer's gonna come in, look at that, and immediately think there's something wrong and take out some money, right? Because, right, so we
Yeah.
look at decluttering, which is really big. We look at,
Oh,
packing things up and pictures, because people want to really see them there, not envision their family and who they are, and
mm,
not, the owner that's there. So there's a lot that I do when we walk through a house, a little bit of staging, a little moving around, that your curb appeal, we'll do a whole walkthrough, and that will get you a lot more money.
absolutely. The clutter. Oh, I gotta tell you, so you don't realize how much clutter you have, especially if you're
Right.
selling after a few years, you've lived in that house, maybe you've had a family, your children have grown, and now it's time to move on. We uh we recently had a situation in our basement where we had a mold problem. And long story short, it involved ripping all the sheetrock out, the tiles, input, a French drain was installed,
Wow.
and basically all of our furniture and anything we had down there in our basement, which was a full finished basement, but
Right,
um, all had to go. A
right,
2-ton dumpster we filled, it was insane. But as I'm going through these closets and the back room or that little area of the basement you could
right.
tuck stuff away, you don't realize
Yes,
it was insane. I said, We'll never fill that dumpster." I even yelled at my guy. I was like, "This is too big. Why did you get this big of a dumpster?" He's like, "You'll fill it."
right,
And sure enough, it was unreal how he filled it.
exactly.
So
Like I have a
those
lot
kind of
going
things.
on, and we like walk through the house, and so I go, they're gonna be decluttering, making sure everything's clearer, and this way I can go in, I can take pictures, and then it'll be a lot easier. So yeah, matters a lot.
It's the little stuff. And that's where the professional eye of yours is so necessary and
Yeah.
so valuable, when
Oh,
you're selling
yeah,
properties. Uh,
absolutely.
We're seeing most appreciation somewhere around 6 to 10% in different areas. It could be higher, it could be lower.
Right.
So, and I'm sure in New York, city, or maybe just Brooklyn alone, any of the boroughs, I'm sure the appreciation is high right now, right? Are you seeing
Exactly.
a lot of people selling their house for a lot more than they
A lot
bought
more
for?
money. Yeah, it's just the inventory is still low.
Yeah, yeah, and
And
that's it.
area, like not every, I hear a lot of things about California, and they have a lot sitting on the market, but we don't have that here.
No,
And
and so
go
it's
in
as simple
and
as
you price it right, that's, that's what matters.
that's key. Because
Yeah,
you price it right, then you're gonna attract more buyers, right? And in
absolutely.
this low inventory market, it's simple economics, supply and demand. There's
Yeah,
way too much supply, excuse me, rather demand, and nowhere near enough supply.
right,
And that's really gonna bode well for a lot of sellers over the next couple of years, I believe.
right.
Uh, we're looking at we're seeing a lot more smaller down payments because of the appreciation factor. Some
Right.
buyers are looking, yeah, I mean, buyers that would normally put down 20%, they're putting down 10, maybe 15, especially if they've got great credit. Why? Because one, we know a refinance little boom or cycle is coming. We know rates are on their way down, and we know in the next couple months or so they should be even lower. So anyone who purchased in the last year or two, there's going to have an opportunity to really lower those payments by getting a lower interest rate. So with that being said, as we're talking about these profits and these values climbing on these homes, you've got a buyer that has great credit,
Right,
had X amount of money, has that 20%, but is getting into a house that might need a few things. They love the house or they like the house, but they can love the house if dot,
Yeah.
dot, dot, right? So what a lot of them are doing right now, and many of my clients, they'll take that 20%, they'll put 10% down. As long as they're working with a strong agent like you, Laura, that they'll be able to get the negotiation done properly. They'll get the bid, they'll win the bid. They put 10% down. And, in some cases, as little as 6 to 12 months, they've got that other 20 or 10%, total
Right.
20% in the home.
Exactly.
They've spent maybe $100 a month for the
Mhm.
next 6 to 8 months. It's cost them $600 to $800. They've made 10% equity in the home. They'll be able to refinance out of the MI, the mortgage insurance,
Yeah.
and they've held on to that money and use that money to actually maximize the value by doing some of those home improvements, those small modifications. So home buying, there's a lot of strategy involved. It's
Lot
not as
lot
simple
of
as, some may think,
That's why I
right?
took like I'm a certified negotiator, and that's really important. And this is the one thing that is my like bone of contention with mortgage brokers. I've told you this, that I have so many mortgage brokers that send buyers out there and say, you're qualified with 3.5%. It is very difficult in bidding war situation to
Yeah.
get a house with 3.5% down. Pre-pandemic, it was hard, but I could do it, 5%. Now, when someone's leaving 20, 30, 40% down, they're not going to take the 3.5%. Why are they not going to take the 3.5%? Because, like I said, right, there's a greater risk that that loan may not go through. If you have a, like if I am working, right, with James, then I know that that mortgage is going to go through. But if it's a mortgage broker that hasn't really looked at everything and it's 3.5%, there is a possibility when that loan goes into underwriting that it will not get accepted. So 3.5% is really, really difficult in this market, in the market of New York, New Jersey. So I would say that just like wait it out another year, save more money, see if you get at least 10%, which I know is difficult, but it's a lot easier for me to be able to negotiate for you if you have a larger down payment. Not necessarily has to be 20. If I can kind of get 10, but 3.5%, because all your buyers are leaving so much money, it's gonna be much more difficult.
Yeah. Well, a
Yeah,
lot of those buyers are selling other properties and coming into all those profits. So, they have the ability to put down, but your first time home buyer may not have that. So it's
right,
so important that you're with someone like yourself that can, make the best of what they are offering. And if they are
right.
at 10%, everything else, will hopefully fall into place. And that negotiating is so important.
So
That's really what makes or breaks the deal. And manifest savings, right? So
yeah,
savings are the final letter in our CHIPS acronym, or is the final letter, I should say. And when we talk about savings, we want to talk about savings from a standpoint of a buyer, but also from a seller, right? So I want to talk a little bit from a buyer standpoint, how I can help them show savings. But before I do, I want to talk more. I want to hear from you because you work with sellers. I don't, right? So you have the ability to help these sellers save some more money on their transaction. How
oh.
would you how could you do that?
Well, and saving is really getting them more money. Like, and sometimes it's also, you might have an agent that says you need to fix something when you don't really need to do it. But you need a really seasoned agent to be able to say to you, no, this is okay. We don't have to do this, but you might have to do this one. So that's really a way that I can save you money with the walkthrough to make sure that anything that we're doing is going to add value and that you're not just spending money. Because I'm not walking through your house just for you to spend money, right?
Yeah,
But if your house really needs to be painted or something really needs to be fixed, and that is going to save you money in the long run because you're going to make more money. So that's key.
that's perfect. That's beautiful. Yeah. And I mean, from a buyer standpoint, one of the things that we're focused on is saving the money on the monthly payment, right? So how can we, we go back to what we talked about earlier. We improve their credit profile. We
Right.
help them receive a lower interest rate. And in some cases, and not many in this cases with the future refis coming, but in some cases, it might even make sense to buy down the rate, right? They have
Right.
the money
Yes.
from one
Explain that.
transaction,
Wait.
one
Right.
situation so they can afford. There's different buy down options.
Mhm.
We don't focus too much on them just because often they don't actually make sense when you do a cost versus benefit analysis, right? What's the
Right.
cost versus what's the benefit? How much monthly savings with this rate versus that one? But what does it cost to get that one? And then we just determine how long it's going to take for that buyer to make that money back that they're shelling
Right.
out now, right?
Doesn't make
So savings can come from all different aspects of home buying, whether it's in the monthly payment, whether it's in the interest rate, or simply in the forced savings of appreciation. right? I always say when you're buying a house, you're buying more than a home, right? You're buying an appreciating asset that's going to create future wealth
Right.
and generational wealth at that point, right? Depending on how long you hold on to the property.
Hmm.
So just by owning the home and buying in the right location, working with the best agent possible to get you the best price on that property, the best loan officer that's going to focus on getting you the lowest interest out of your pocket.
Right.
That's really how you're going to maximize that wealth.
Right.
And Lori, I know we're the team to do it.
Right.
So uh,
We always make a good team, so everything's always good.
we do, we do. Well, that's pretty much most of our show here. That's just about all of our show, I should say. Do you have anything else you want to touch on before we wrap it up?
No, I think this is great. Enjoy having my morning coffee with you, and I hope that you enjoy this series, everyone. And we're going to do this every couple of weeks. So, anything that you would like us to discuss, put in the comments. We're glad to do that. And we'll see you soon, right?
That's it. Thank you so much. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to the latest episode of Prepared, Aware, and Ready to Buy. We are your dynamic team, James Murphy with Advisors Mortgage Group, Laurie Savino with Corcoran, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Bye. Take care. Have a great day.